Olá, sejam bem-vindos ao Agro América, programa produzido em parceria com o Instituto Interamericano de Cooperação para a Agricultura, o ICA, aqui no canal AgroMais. Eu sou Gabriel Estrela e hoje teremos um programa especial. O Diálogo Brasil-África foi realizado uma parceria entre o governo brasileiro e o ICA em Brasília para falar sobre a cooperação técnica científica entre os países latino-americanos e os países africanos, 2 meses antes de uma reunião que será realizada em Brasília também, que consiste na presença dos ministros da agricultura de diversos países africanos. E para falar sobre essas possibilidades e também os desafios que podemos enfrentar nessa cooperação internacional, eu trago para vocês, aqui, direto dos estúdios do AgroMais, o senhor Jean Jacques Muhinda, que é diretor regional das regiões Oriental e Sul da África para a Aliança da Revolução Verde em África. Dr. Muhinda, thank you so much for your presence here once again. It's an honor and finally to have someone from AGRA speak about the possibilities between cooperation between the African continent and Latin America.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for having me in your nice studio today. Happy to interact with you.
Thank you. So I'd like to please for you to introduce the work that AGRA does, how many countries are involved, as well as the technical part and importance between the work that you do in providing and developing sustainable agriculture.
Thank you very much. The Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, famously known as AGRA, is a technical institution that has been established almost 20 years ago in 2006. And our main mandate is to really help our continent through our national government to transform the agricultural system. So we are a technical organization that provides both technical support to continental institutions, to regional institutions, to national governments, with the intention actually of advancing transformation of the agri-food systems in the continent. That is the type of work we do as AGRA. We do provide support at different levels, as I just said, at a national level, but we do also support technology dissemination and mainly focusing on supporting smallholder farmer production and productivity in the continent.
Mm-hmm. Could you give us a mainframe just to understand the diversity of the family farmers that exist in Africa? I mean, maybe not all our viewers know where, the Congo Basin is in relation to the Sahel, in relation to the North African countries, which have a distinct kind of agriculture in comparison to other regions. And how can you show us the diversity that we can expect when thinking about technical cooperation with so many countries?
Thank you very much. I think it's important to first and foremost highlight that the African continent is not the same. It's so diverse in terms of production systems and agroecological conditions. Just to give you an example, if you look at the Northern Africa, that is purely a different agroecological system compared to what we have in East Africa, compared to what we have in West Africa, compared to what we have in the Southern Africa. So therefore, depending on the agroecological conditions, different regions in the continent grow different crops and have different farming systems. If I just give you an example, in the Northern Africa, especially the Maghreb countries, will be producing commodities like wheat, horticulture. When you come down to Sub-Saharan Africa, which is largely West, East, and Southern Africa, East Africa this is the highland conditions where we have more rainfall. Farmers will grow more crops like maize, rice, and others. You go to West Africa, you have more rice production. I'm just using an example for the major commodities. You go to the Southern Africa region where we have like one farming season a year. Farmers will grow a variety of crops, but this is another region where we grow a lot of maize, depending on the rainfall. It's also important to highlight that we do not have enough irrigation in the continent. Only 6% of the farmland is irrigated. Therefore, most of the production is done under rain-fed system, and it is done largely with the smallholder farmers. That explains why the productivity in the continent is still still a little bit lower compared to the world's average.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And the objective is to strengthen these family farmers, or to also look at large-scale agribusiness type of production, which is very prominent in many areas of Latin America. What is the total mission as you see as the future of agriculture in the continent?
So let me say that a large proportion of agricultural production in the continent is done by the smallholder farmers. When we talk about smallholder farmers in the context of Africa, really farmers who have like between 1 to 5 hectares of land, it might be different from what we call smallholder farmers in Brazil. That is almost 70%, 80% of food in the continent is produced by smallholder farmers. Therefore, the investment and the planning is done around that. That's number one. Number two, we have a continental framework in Africa that is known as the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Plan. In short, is known as CAADP, that provides a guidance as far as agricultural transformation in the continent is concerned. This framework actually is a 10-year roadmap, is a 10-year action plan and a strategy that defines the major strategic areas for agricultural investment. Some of the areas we look at strengthening resilience of smallholder production. We look at strengthening resilience to climate change-related shocks. We look at investment areas strengthening food and nutrition. And we look at areas also looking at empowering youth and ensuring equity and even gender mainstreaming in the agricultural sector. So that's the framework that gives us a direction of travel for 10 years. And the current one actually starts from this year to 2035. Everything that countries do, the regional do, is guided by that particular framework. So therefore, investment, both at country level, at regional level, at continental level, are mobilized towards achieving the milestone and the target that are defined in the CAADP. So, but as I said, most of the focus is really strengthening productivity by smallholder farmers because they carry the major responsibility as far as feeding the African continent is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Not only do they have the responsibility, but I imagine as our family farmers also are very susceptible to climate change, which means that they are the first that we need to look at when we think about climate resiliency and creating food systems that are resilient to the changes that are happening now, to those that will happen further in the future. In Brasilia, you were here for pretty much a very important meeting talking about South-South cooperation between the different countries. I'd like for you to highlight, to establish and to achieve the goals for this 10-year framework plan, what is the contribution in cooperation that countries in Latin America and the Caribbean can contribute in order for there to be not only a positive exchange between scientists, between technicians, but also policy developers in order to improve productivity in the African continent?
Absolutely. That's a very good question, Gabriel. But let me go back again to the first point, the last point you made on the family farming situation in the continent. I just want to tell you that, unfortunately, our farming system, our food production system is currently affected by climate change, as you can imagine. And our new 10-year roadmap that I just mentioned recognize that. And our head of state and government have made a very strong commitment to ensure that investment are mobilized towards building very resilient farming systems. Just to give you an example, our head of state have committed to mobilize $100 billion until 2035, just to support agri-food systems transformation and resilience in the continent. Beside that, we also have individual country commitment to allocate 10% of public spending every year to the agriculture. And most of those resources go towards smallholder farmer capacity strengthening. Unfortunately, where we are now, we still spend close to 34 billion importing food in the continent. And this is something that we want to reverse by 2035, according to the plan that I just told you. What we have learned, because this is not the first time we interact with Brazil and Latin America in general, we have identified critical collaboration areas. Because as you can imagine, both Africa and Brazil are in the tropics. We are all in the tropical condition. We therefore share agroecological condition and farming system. They are similar. So therefore, technologies that are adaptable in Brazil can be easily transferred, tested, and scaled and adopted in the context of Africa. So just to give you an idea of the areas that we have identified, number one is the whole area of germplasm sharing technologies in crop varieties that Brazil has already invested in, which have proved to work and good productivity, which we can simply transfer to Africa, do a quick adaptation, and scaling and promote innovation and adoption by farmers. A good example is soybean. Another area that we have identified is the whole sector of livestock, including beef production, but also including fodder production. I think Brazil is leading very, very well on that. Area number 3, which we have strongly discussed this week, is also the opportunity to learn from the Brazil's Cerrado agricultural miracle that has happened in the last 3 decades. And the last point I want to mention, which we also want to learn from Brazil, that miracle of Cerrado agricultural transformation did not happen just because of technology. There is something else beyond science. And this speaks to public policy innovations in institutions. We were looking yesterday on how Embrapa has been empowered to drive innovation in agricultural development and innovation in research to make sure that it's linked with the private sector, but it's linked with private farmers. So there is a component of public policy innovation and institutional innovation that Africa can learn from Brazil, and it's just amazing. So we're now building a roadmap with very concrete actions where we can really learn from Brazil, and these are things that are very possible in Africa. Just to give you an idea, in our CADAP framework, which I've already mentioned, which is a 10-year roadmap and strategy for the continent, our head of state have committed to make at least 30% of our arable land under sustainable management systems by 2035.
That's 30 in all?
In all. 30% of the total arable land in Africa to make it, to ensure that it's under sustainable management system. And the best way to do it is actually to learn from the Cerrado agricultural miracle that has happened here. And we don't have to take 30 years like Brazil did. We can do it in 10 years. And this is a commitment.
Technology is there, right?
Technology is there.
Yeah.
And also the other commitment under the CADAP is that to ensure that 40% of smallholder households in Africa are actually protected against climate change shocks. And that is exactly what has happened here. This was a savanna region where we're sitting now in Brasilia, but it has been transformed to become the food basket for Brazil. That is exactly something that can happen in Africa, both in West Africa, Southern Africa, and Eastern Africa, which are the regions that are largely affected by climate change conditions as we speak now.
Fair enough. Well, we're going to go to a short break. On returning from the break, I'd like to speak more about this type of program, how we can progress and other details. Fique por aí que o Agro América volta em instantes. Não perca o segundo bloco desse programa muito especial. Até já! Olá, sejam bem-vindos de volta ao Agro América, hoje conversando com o Dr. Jean Jacques Muhinda, que é o diretor regional para as regiões Oriental e Sul para o projeto A Aliança da Revolução Verde em África, um projeto que visa providenciar e desenvolver técnicas para avançar na agricultura sustentável em todo o continente africano. Antes de nós entrarmos na nossa pausa, no primeiro bloco, o Dr. Muhinda estava falando que a África importa somente em commodities cerca de 34 bilhões em produtos que eles mesmos podem produzir, garantindo não somente renda, mas segurança alimentar para diversos países. Dr. Muhinda, I'd like to understand, on the 10-year framework until 2035, by how much are you willing or are you planning to scale down the import bill?
Thank you very much, Gabriel. So let me just specify first that the total spending on food importation I talked about, $34 billion, is largely on 4 major crop commodities. Mm-hmm. That includes rice, wheat, maize, and soybean.
Yep.
So the 10-year plan that we have worked together, as a continent, African Union leading that, and the African Union Development Agency known as AGRA, supported by most of the institutions in the continent, including my institution, AGRA, provides a roadmap of substituting import and reducing import by 100% in 10 years from now, in 2035. That requires making, serious investment in the agricultural sector. I've just told you about the commitment of our head of state, our national government, to mobilize $100 billion by 2035. If that is achieved, then it's going to take us to the level of self-sufficiency in those commodities that we're currently importing. Mm-hmm. I've also mentioned probably that one I didn't highlight, that one of the commitments also our national government have made is to make sure that we reinvest 15% of our total GDP in the agri-food sector.
That's 15% total GDP from which nations?
All the nations, because this is a continental commitment. So the commitment...
56 states now.
55 states. So
yeah.
Beyond allocating 10% of every country spending every year to agricultural sector, there is also that commitment of reinvesting 15% of the GDP, the total country GDP, in the agri-food sector. Mm-hmm. All those commitment combined is what is going to take us to self-sufficiency and totally eliminating imports by 2035. That's a commitment, and I believe this is something we can achieve. And probably for your information also, different countries are importing different things. I told you about Northern Africa, for instance, countries like Egypt are producing surplus wheat. Ethiopia today is producing surplus wheat. So we also want to promote intra-Africa trade for countries that are producing surplus to trade with countries that are are deficient in some of the commodities. We have countries like Tanzania that are now producing excess rice. Rice from Tanzania is being traded in East Africa. So the idea is to produce locally. We know that all the countries will not be self-sufficient in everything. Mm-hmm. But the idea is whatever is producing in surplus in one country is traded across the continent in deficit countries. And that's the concept. It's not countries will not import, right, but at least countries will trade within the continent. So what we are trying to substitute is import from outside the continent.
And how would that be managed? Will it be managed by the African Union? Will it be managed by another entity? Who will be, or which groups will be in charge of overlooking how this distribution will be made?
Sure. That's a very good question. So beyond the African Union and the African Union Development Agency, we have a specialized entity known as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that is based in Accra in Ghana. That's the institution that oversees intra-Africa trade. It's not only focused on agriculture, but it has a major component on agriculture. So the institution is currently finalizing a specific strategy that is going to drive intra-Africa trade on food commodities, and our institution is supporting that. So that's an institution that tracks actually not only cross-border trade within the same region, but also intra-Africa trade, which is unfortunately still very limited today. Right. And we have a commitment to increase it up to 35%, making sure that African countries are trading amongst themselves. So good enough, we have at least for all these commodities, countries that are producing enough. Where we are still falling short, and this is why we are looking at Brazil, is on soybean. Unfortunately, very few countries like Zambia, South Africa are producing enough soybean and excess for the market, but most of the other countries in the continent are still in deficit. Mm-hmm. And this is why we see an opportunity for not only increasing domestic production, but also increasing domestic trade and
Right.
cross-border trade in the context of Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
Mm-hmm. And this framework, it looks into providing a fair, not only trade system, but also a fair way of enhancing food security for each of the countries. When we're looking at 15% of GDP, it's quite a lot of money. And I've been thinking how to measure that small nations and large nations get the same share or a fair share of what they're investing into.
Absolutely. One of the major mandates for this institution is making sure that there's a harmonization of trade policies and trade infrastructure generally.
Right.
So the major challenges currently for inter-Africa trade are at two levels. Number one is infrastructure, making sure that you have road network, you have railway network, you have port network, marine transportation, ground transportation. So that is the investment component. There's a lot of work going on with support from Afrexim Bank to make sure that there is a connection. We have to connect regions and countries. Yeah. That is one side. Then there is the whole soft infrastructure. The soft infrastructure talks about harmonizing trade policies, making sure that we harmonize standards in terms of sanitary and phytosanitary systems across the country so that a product that is certified in Uganda can move freely to Kenya without being affected by non-tariff barriers. That's the soft part of work that needs to be done, which is being heavily invested in, including even the whole area of digitization of trade across the continent so that we can have a very good foresight in terms of where is surplus being produced, where is deficit being observed, so that countries can plan as far as trade is concerned. One good example I just want to highlight here is a program that my institution is supporting in Eastern and Southern Africa that is called the Regional Food Balance Sheet. This is a flagship program that is digitized, that allows countries to see if I'm having a deficit in maize production this year in Zambia, I'm able to see which country is producing surplus digitally, whether it is Tanzania, whether it is Uganda, whether it's South Africa, and therefore I'm able to plan my trade or my importation of maize in a manner that is informed, and I'm able to look at the records and even the prices of the commodities from one country to another country. Yeah. That is the work that is being done in the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that needs to be taking us to that level of increasing intra-Africa trade and reducing import from outside of the continent.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's an important measure. It's an important expectation.
Yeah.
One of the important also cooperative I think, task force that was implemented with the help of ICA was the Living Soils Initiative, which looks into degraded soils and how to recuperate them. I know that AGRA has been involved in this initiative, and I'd like to know how has it been implemented and how will it be implemented in the future? How is this initiative working with different governments in order to recuperate degraded soils, with the intent of making these soils arable for agriculture? Is this a long-term plan, a medium-term plan? How do you see this in terms of South-South cooperation, as an example of South-South cooperation? And what do you see as the future of this initiative?
Very good point, Gabriel. So let me start a little bit higher and link it with the impact of climate change today. We talked about it and see how this initiative is going to contribute on mitigating that. Number one, it's important to highlight that today, as we speak, climate change impact is costing our continent almost $200 billion every year. That is the fact, if nothing is done. That's number one. Number two, we also know, as I told you, that only 6% of our arable land is equipped with irrigation infrastructure. That's another major challenge that needs to be addressed in the context of CAADP. Number three, the current projection models show that if we continue business as usual without massive investment, by 2050, almost 900 million people in Africa are going to be affected by one or another climate change related impact, and we don't want to be there. Now, coming back to that, the current situation of degradation of soils and land in the continent is worrying because of several reasons, and the climate change is one of those. We are getting less rainfall in some regions. We are getting very frequent cyclones in Latin America, and we are losing a lot of soil fertility for different reasons. So the Living Soil initiative you talked about is anchored to our broader roadmap. We have another 10-year roadmap called the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan for 10 years again, 2024, 2034, that was endorsed by our head of state last year in May, in 2024 in Kenya. So when we started talking about with Brazil in terms of identifying flagship area, the entry point, and what we can learn from Brazil, we noticed that Brazil has made a huge progress in terms of promoting low carbon emissions farming system. It's also known as low carbon agriculture.
Dr. Muhinda, thank you so much for this opportunity and sharing us so much knowledge about the opportunities and challenges in agriculture in Africa.
Thank you, Gabriel. I'm the one to actually thank you for having me again today in your beautiful Agro América studio. I really love it. Thank you again.
I hope to have you here again.
I'll come back.
Bom, o Agro América fica por aqui. Agradeço a sua audiência. Espero que tenha sido uma oportunidade para aprender mais sobre as oportunidades e os desafios da agricultura no continente africano. Fico por aqui, te agradeço pela audiência e até a próxima.